There's a lot to talk about tonight. I am very excited about this series, The Passion, what Jesus did, what Jesus said, and why. I'm very excited that we have some tremendous help with Reverend Dr. Joanne Terrell, who is the professor at Chicago Theological Seminary, where Shay and I hail from, where we've got other Gather folks going into or checking out. So CTS has always been sort of part of the identity of Gather, and she is a big part of the identity of CTS. And so she came to us and just said, I want to do a Lenten series, and I want to do it on the Passion, and I want to do it at Gather. And our answer was yes, yes, yes. There you go. So because she is actually in class tonight, Christian also is here. I got to know Christian in Dr. Terrell's class, actually, in her systematic theology class. And so she's teaching systematic theology tonight online. And so consequently, she can't be here with us. And we were like, oh no, what are we going to do? And then we had this bright idea. It's like, we can do anything. It's virtual. So what happened is that on Wednesday afternoon, Shay and I met with her. And exactly as we expected, we threw out one question and she took it and ran with it and off she goes. And so what we're going to be doing in this study is we're going to spend about 20 minutes every week with you guys just watching kind of in this conversation with Shay and me and Dr. Terrell. So this is where chat is going to come in very helpful, very, very good. And Shay and I'll be in the chat section while this conversation is going on. I want to give you a couple terms that are in here that might be that might be new because they got a little seminary-esque there for a minute there. And one of the things that she talks about, and it's central to her work, let me tell you a little bit about Joanne Terrell. Dr. Joanne Terrell is a product of Union Theological Seminary in New York City. Particularly, she's a product of Dr. James Cone, who is known as the father of Black liberation theology. If any of you watched the Black Church special on PBS this week, Henry Louis Gates spends about 10 minutes on James Cone, and Dr. Terrell was his research assistant. So while he was doing all of this work, she was out doing all the field work for him to pull together his theory of Black liberation theology. In her own work as a womanist theologian, not just a feminist, but an African-American feminist, a womanist theologian, she has been very, very interested in the idea of atonement and what that means, and how, particularly in the framework of African-American life and in the framework of African-American women's lives, sacrifice is often exalted as like it's demanded of you. You have to sacrifice. And they always point to Jesus. And she has some challenges with some of that. And that's because what is known in theological talk as the Hermeneutic of Sacrifice, which is this idea that Jesus was born to die, that Jesus, the whole reason that, and the idea that our sins nailed Jesus to the cross. These are problems for her because it takes the agency away from Jesus. And that's a big challenge. So she's going to talk in this conversation, she's going to bring up the Hermeneutic of Sacrifice. But what she's meaning is that there are a lot of strains of Christianity that sort of teach that Jesus didn't have a choice, that he did not have any choice. And that's a problem for her because that same kind of hermeneutic is often used to oppress people. You just don't have a choice. You have to be poor because that's the way that works. And so that's kind of the way that she goes. So I wanted to give you that. She also will drop every now and then references. The Buddha does this, or the Tao says that, because she is sort of, as I've mentioned before, she's sort of bi-spiritual. She floats between the spaces of Buddhism. Her Buddhism informs her Christianity and vice versa. So you'll get some of that too. But get ready, fasten your seatbelts. I'm just telling you, Dr. Terrell's about to come into the house here with y'all. So, but first, I'm not quite ahead of myself. First, I want to just look at the text, and then we'll get into her conversation. See, this is what happens. We're going to be talking today about these two kingdoms. This is where our focus is going to be. The kingdom, the Roman Empire, and the kingdom of God. And the theme that we're going to be exploring is this idea, because this is all over Mark's gospel, the idea of domination versus resistance, and how that works, and what Christianity's role is as a resistance movement to empire. So you get to this text, And I'm just going to read it quickly for the sake of, because I want us to get right to Dr. Terrell. I'm just going to read it very quickly. Y'all follow along. So when they were approaching Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany near the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples and said to them, go into the village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it. I love that. Jesus said, go steal it. Just go, you see a coat, just go steal it. Just go get it. If anybody says to you, why are you doing this? Just say this, the Lord needs it, and we'll send it back here immediately. So they went away and they found a colt tied near a door outside the street. And as they were untying it, I just love sort of the moxie here. Some of the bystanders said to them, what are you doing untying the colt? And they told them what Jesus had said. And they said, well, go ahead, take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and they threw their cloaks on it. And he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut in the fields. And then those who went ahead and those who followed were shouting, Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven. Then he entered Jerusalem. After all that, I love this. And this is Mark, who, he condenses everything. Then he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he'd had a look around at everything, and it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. So it wasn't like he was leading this protest for some big rally. It's like, okay, let's go see what's going on in the temple. Got it straight. All right, we can go home now. We'll come back. That's the drama here. And now I want to introduce you all. I hope you all enjoyed this nearly as much as we did. Here we go. Well, it's really my pleasure to welcome one of my beloved teachers and a close friend of Gather, Reverend Dr. Joanne Terrell, to join this conversation. And she's going to sort of be our guide and our thought starter through the series. On March 18th, she'll be with us live, but she's teaching every Thursday evening at Chicago Theological Seminary. And so she's unable to be with us in real time. So what we've done is set up these conversations that Shay and I will have with Dr. Terrell to kind of just set some groundwork, get our juices flowing. And then what will happen after that is Shay and I will kind of break down some of the lesson. We've just read the Palm Sunday story, the story of the procession. And so that's usually where the Passion story starts. But Dr. Terrell, just to get us going, so welcome, but just to get us going, where does the Passion start for you? When we say the Passion of the Christ, what does that really mean for you?
Well, the word passion comes from the Latin passio or pati, which means to suffer. And it's amazing that we always equate love and passion. Mm-hmm. But and therefore we equate love and pain. We equate love and pain, or at least the willingness to experience pain because of love. Mm-hmm. And so for me, Jesus' passion, which in typical fashion is regarded as the passion is regarded as starting at the Stations of the Cross with the state. But I think of the passion as starting with Jesus's decision to leave heaven and come to earth. 42 generations before he came when the earth was formed, according to the story. And so I think of it as a before the foundation sort of love, a sort of before the foundation kind of willingness to go and to address the suffering world, the world that God had just made and was already suffering its first murder, already suffering the first mother's heartbreak, already suffering the first father's sense of failure towards his children, already the world is suffering. And so Jesus' willingness to go, according to the incarnational aspects of the story, his willingness to go means that his passion was the thing that motivated him to go and to do what he did. And when he came to earth, when he made his advent to earth, he was prepared. He was prepared to suffer for love. He was prepared to do that, and he did that often. He did that by risking censure of his community. He did that by doing things at times when he was not supposed to be doing them, risking even his life, even up until the moment that he died, not just when he died, but along the way, he was risking himself because he loved so much.
Connection between love and pain. I think that also answers some of the dilemmas that a lot of us, or some of the resistance some of us have to this story, because it is, we see the extent of the pain, and a lot of times I don't think we equate that with that. This is a way of really demonstrating the extent of the love, right? The solidarity of God with those who suffer. So I think there's some really wonderful, you've just unleashed all kinds of wonderful stuff.
Well, along with love and pain, there's also the hermeneutics of sacrifice, the imposition of pain in the name of love. That's not really love.
Right.
Imposition of the duty to sacrifice, but sacrifice, if it's true, it comes from within oneself because one loves. If it's truly that, but if it's the hermeneutics of sacrifice, if it's the imposition of the duty to sacrifice, which many of our religious constructions compel us to do, then there's something wrong with that. Particularly if we think of Jesus's death as a once for all thing, that actually ends every religious rationale for violence, every religious rationale. If it's once for all, if we accept that this is God who has suffered and died, we have done the most egregious we can do, then that ends our incentive, or at least it should. It ends our incentive to create suffering with our love, but rather to live into the joys and the beauties of our love, the duties of our love, to love and heal and help one another. I mean, I think the Jesus story is so powerful because it's been used as a power against, but it is a story about power with folk, and we need to take back that angle of the story. That is, it's not simply about the imposition. Is not even about that at all. It's not about the imposition of the duty to become sacrificial in our relating to each other, but it's about loving each other so much to be willing to give of ourselves to every extent possible. And that's what Jesus was always willing to do. He always went with people, where he went to the poor, where they were. He helped people. I love that about Jesus and the Buddha. They went to the poor. They didn't just expect them to come to them, or expect them to be left out of the equation for enlightenment or salvation, but rather gave them the power of their own voice, the power of their own intellect and authority that God gives you through the gift of your mind. Yes, I think this is so wonderful. It's so wonderful that Jesus's mission was really about empowering people, and not empowering people to really love, and not compelling people to sacrifice in order to demonstrate love.
I'm going to say, Dr. Terrell, I love that, because we're kind of deconstructing this idea of a one-time only. And I know you write about hermeneutics of sacrifice in your book, Power in the Blood. But I love this idea that Jesus and God, right, in Jesus, comes toward the oppressed, comes toward the marginalized. And so it's, instead of being a one-time only thing, which I grew up, once saved, always saved. And it kind of just fits that paradigm where you only have to do something one time. And it really takes away that daily struggle, that daily passion, if you will, that the labor of love, however you want to name that it's more of a regular and ongoing occurrence, that we live in a society that upholds these systems, but we, like Jesus, are called to embody a different way of being that comes alongside others. And so I just wonder, maybe if you can speak about how all of this kind of lays the groundwork, both in the Palm Sunday story, but also in thinking about this Jesus who always comes toward, how it lays the groundwork for liberation, the work of liberation.
Well, liberation theology actually takes its impetus from the scripture in Luke 4, 18 to 20, you know, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he is given me the mandate to preach to the poor, to go to the poor, to bring sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are captive, to bless those who are abused and bruised. So his mission is that. It's not in order to make pious people so that society can recognize us as Christians. Love has teeth. Love has heft. Love is not some fly by night sort of thing. Love is real and is true to the extent we are willing to give of ourselves to the others, and and that has nothing to do with piety. Has nothing to do with that. And sometimes love is overreaching, and sometimes it's anxious, and all of these things, but it's real. When it's real, it actually comes up with a way to give itself.
Yes.
It comes up with a way to give. And that's if we know how to do that, then we are truly liberated.
Yeah.
We experience liberation, and we want it for everyone else. We want it for every other person, not just as individuals. We want it for our society. To love truly is hard to love fully. It's hard to accept that what we mistook for love is not love. And and I just think that, therefore, learning to love is a lifelong process. Therefore, becoming a Christian is a lifelong process if that's what you want to be. It's not just the moment of conversion and then you got it.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
No. As the slave forebear said, Lord, I want to be a Christian in my heart because I've heard what it's about.
Yeah.
I know that you say I should love my neighbors, but I'm having a hard time with this man that's beating the hell out of me.
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time with this man who sold my children.
So all of this leads me to some questions that bring us to this Palm Sunday scenario, right? And one of them is, several times Jesus says in Mark, in fact, I think it's 3 times, he says, I got to go to Jerusalem. I got to go face some people. Jesus knows he's cruising for a bruising. He said, they're going to arrest me. They're going to kill me. Love is driving him. He knows this love has got to drive him. And I really agree with you. We always want to make Jesus, God came down to die. I think there's a whole lot between that and that has to happen in Jesus, both in his humanity and his divinity. Can we talk a little bit about where Jesus might be? We don't know for real, but for certain, but where Jesus might be, what's the inner conflict? Because we always think Jesus just gets up every morning and he's together. I got to go with this. I'm ready to go. Let's just go do this. I know what I got to do. Talk to us. Let's put some dimension to that.
Well, I think that persecution is a foreseeable consequence for anyone who would speak truth to power. Especially if you speak it in love. And by love, I mean that full range of things that goes with it. Anger goes with that too. Gentleness goes with it. Striking the wound that heals goes with it. The healing goes with it. All that goes. So I think this was a foreseeable consequence of his life, the way he had been living it, against the systems of domination, against the religious authorities, against the ingrained social habits, against the customs concerning women. So he definitely ordered his steps against some things, but he ordered himself for some things too. And those things both got him in trouble. The things that, when you extend the right to consider yourself a child of God to a woman, when you extend the right to consider yourself a child of God to a foreigner, when you extend the right to consider yourself a child of God to anyone who is not the usual suspects,
Lepers.
you know,
Yeah.
anyone who's not the usual suspects, then you're setting yourself against the powers that be, or the powers that think they are. I'll put it that way.
There you go.
The powers that think they are.
I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about how this demonstration we see on Sunday, and the fallout from it as the week goes on, all the way up to this kangaroo court with the Barabbas moment and everything, how that somehow or other reflects itself, and I've kind of tipped it off a little bit of what I think, but in our own world and in our own culture, and some of the stuff that we're hearing now in religious circles, this both on the cancel culture side and on the we need to accept everybody side, how what we've given up is this idea of love that has knowledge behind it, right? If that makes any sense.
Love that not only has knowledge, but that also has particularity behind it.
Yes. Talk a little bit more about that. Yeah.
I mean, particularity. So, this is a wonderful conversation. Thanks. And but I was thinking about how the Black community really owes it to ourselves to celebrate our leaders and our thought leaders, because they help us name particularity as something that is important to our Christian identity. That very particularity is beloved of God. So when James Brown said, "Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud," we owe him a debt of love for helping us to articulate that.
Yes.
Because otherwise we'd be like, well, we would be suffering from the need to invisibilize ourselves again, just as the white evangelical message really tries to invisibilize particularity. And say, oh, it just doesn't matter what you do. Jesus loves you. Doesn't matter what you do. You're saved if you say this formula or that. No. Very particular. It's very particularly true. It's particularly true that a particular people were being addressed about their particular set of political circumstances, their social circumstances, their social customs. All of that was being challenged so that they could become ever more the people of God. The way is to say that God is on the side of the oppressed. That's what the scriptures say. That's what the scriptures say in the Hebrew Bible. That's what they say in the New Testament. That's what they say. God is on the side of the oppressed. It was the Exodus because the people were oppressed. These were God's very particular people who were oppressed. It was the people in Jerusalem and Judea because the people were under occupation in Palestine. They were under occupation. And so the particularity is a very important element of our faith walk, to acknowledge it, to be rooted in it, and to only reach out our hand across the other side when everybody understands that we have particularity.
That's right. When all of that is honored, because that's part of the making, right? Yeah, it's part of the making. It's part of the plan. It's all of that, right?
It's part of the goodness of God.
Yes.
To create such fabulous diversity. I love how the Tao Te Ching puts it. Jesus makes us great, and great means far-reaching return. Farther-reaching return.
Mm-hmm.
Far, far, farther reaching
Mm-hmm.
return.
Yes.
So yes, we have a universal impetus within our religion, but we have that very particularity that God loves because God made it, all of it.
Shay, what you thinking?
I'm just thinking how good it is to listen to Dr. Terrell preach and teach, and you know, I just have so much love. And when she speaks, something happens inside of me, and I feel like something's being pulled out of me, and I don't know. I feel like I'm, you know, sitting in her class again, and being inspired to see God always already at work. And you know, the thing I'll take away from this conversation is hearing her talk about the connection between love and justice, and you know, and looking today on Ash Wednesday, you know, and as we prepare for a season of Lent, really having some self-critical reflection to look and to begin to ask questions. If, you know, am I performing piety with a language of love, or am I, you know, am I walking the path? You know, when she said that, you know, when love is truly real, it finds a way to give itself to the other, right?
Yes.
It's always
Yes.
generative, always justice oriented, always, you know, and it brings about collective liberation and mutual flourishing. And and it's not just a theoretical thing; it's a thing that we have to embody and you know, and walk out.
One of the things that excites me is that we're able to give the folks that gather a sense of kind of the conversations that have been very formative for Shay and me, being with you and learning from you, and just your influence. Is all over Gather. You know, you got fingerprints all over Gather that you know you put there. So I just
That was a wonderful community. I've enjoyed the times I've been there, and just it's just wonderful to see people just worshiping as they want to, as they want to, and not being compelled by bad theology to think of themselves in a bad way.
Amen. Amen. Okay, well, thank you so much. And we will see you next week. And now Shay and I are going to try to dig into some of this other stuff. But God bless you. And thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everything.
Love to you, Dr. Terrell.
Love. Amen.
Love to you. Love to
you. Any initial thoughts, questions, anything come to mind?
Well, the first thing that kind of blew me away, and it's just, I kept thinking this in my head, is this notion of the passion beginning, you know, eons before, and that this was just all in the plan just from the beginning of time. It just, I don't know, that was really affecting for me.
Anything else?
I really loved what she said about love and how it's important for people to be seen. If we really regard one another as members of the same family, then the child, some of the kids I know, because I'm a teacher, that are living on the Navajo reservation with no running water, no electricity, limited access to good quality food, their pain is my pain, therefore. The pain of a child that's living in the inner city, a Black child that has a substandard school, is having bad experiences in their neighborhood, their pain is my pain. If we really do believe that everyone is a part of that divine family, then it behooves us to fight for that justice, because we're not going to watch somebody we love be hurt. When you feel ownership for the people in your national community, you don't let them suffer. You say, I hear your pain. I want to do something about this pain because I love you and it hurts me to see you hurt. Yeah. And I also want to say, I just love what you were saying earlier about Jesus having agency, because that's really important. I think there were several times in the Bible where, especially those 40 days when he was contemplating in the desert, you know, Lord, do I really want this mantle? Is this really what I want? It makes his choice all the more divine and all the more beautiful because he willingly said, yes, Lord, yes, I will take this. because I love these people.
That's a those are both very critical points, and they tie together, particularly in liberation theology. You just sort of did a little liberation theology thesis for us, right? Which is that, first of all, God's siding in solidarity with the oppressed and the poor and the marginalized is where you always find God. What did you say? You find God with Israel in Exodus because they're enslaved. You find God coming to Judea because they're in an occupied territory. There are places today where we would just expect to find God because you would expect to find God on the border where parents are being separated from their children. You would expect to find God in areas of Texas where it's not about a winter storm that took their power out. They never had power to begin with, and nobody took time to see it. You see that these are the places where you really, if you want to find God, you are not going to find God. I'm sorry. And I love St. Patrick's Cathedral for its architecture and the choir and everything, but that's not where you're going to find God, okay? You're going to find God in these other places. And that's why the whole, what this week, this passion is leading up to is a statement of solidarity. If you want, I'm willing to go to the death. There's this great song, you thought I was saving, so you sacrificed your life. You thought I was to die for. There is this, we are all to die for. I'm willing to go all the way to the death to show you just how close I am and how willing I am to stand with you in your pain. That's why how that comes together. Jeff, you look like you got something.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah, I was going to type it, but I had a few thoughts. I had the thought that a lot of people they say they do, but they don't really want to encounter God. Mm-hmm. And the other was her gratitude to
James Brown
about I'm Black and I'm proud. And I thought, I don't know if I like that. And then I thought, what's the counterpart of that? I'm white and I'm proud. I don't know. I'm thinking, and I thought, well, when you love somebody, it comes out. You can't hold it in. And if you love your people, you want them to be proud. You want people to be proud of who they are. And if there's not pride there, it hurts the one who loves you, the lover. So you want your people to be proud. And I think see them not feeling proud, you want to give them some kind of way to feel proud.
I think a holy pride is a pride that it goes back to her idea of particularity, right? I am made this way. All of me, how I am made. It's not just my skin, it's also my nature. It's the world that I've been inhabit. We are all a certain kind of way, y'all, just because of virtue of where we are born. Folks that are born in Michigan, I'm sorry, y'all are different than the folks that are born in Illinois, and you're part of your particularity. There are a lot of Michiganders on this, I think, on this study, but it's even down to that. Folks that live on the north side of Chicago are different than folks that live on the west side. There's particularity, and so that pride of your particularity, where pride gets in the way, is if it has to come at the expense of someone else. You see. Yeah, why? That's where you move out of pride and into supremacy.
Sin of pride.
That's where you move. You trip out
right away.
Right.
No, I don't think that's what it means.
So what happens is, for instance, the reason why James Brown's "I'm Black and I'm Proud," and I'm not a person of color, so that probably somebody else could say it better than what I'm about to say. But I'm gonna swing out there for a second, and somebody correct me or bring some color, some nuance to this. He said that because in a white supremacist society, the Black identity had been so crushed and had been forced so low that someone had to stand up and say, you need to own your particularity. We went through the same thing in gay liberation. I'm here, I'm queer, get over it. That's it, babies. But I've grown up my whole life telling me I need to be in a closet. Well, now you're in trouble because I'm out. And, and I'm gonna own all of me in this. That was sort of those sort of coming out moments.
Yeah, and that's not said by somebody who doesn't love you. That's somebody who
exactly
loves the
right.
gay community says, be proud of
that's
that.
Exactly right.
Not a snotty pride, but a proud, feel good about yourself.
The minute that pride becomes hubris, you're in trouble. The minute that pride becomes arrogance, the minute it becomes power, that's sort of challenge there.
we have a beautiful African story about pride. When we were in Ghana, there was a procession that was going to the bishop was going by to dedicate a new chapel at the end of the road, and they had a procession, and as they were processing to the church, the crowd was sitting on the side, and there was a little boy that the bishop came over and said to the little boy, I will give you an orange if you can tell me where I can find God, expecting the answer to be in his nice new Episcopal church at the end of the road. But the little boy said, sir, I will give you 2 oranges if you can tell me where I cannot find God. It's a true story. You didn't hear it? What happened?
No, it's a wonderful, wonderful story. Yes. Give you 2 oranges. There you go. That's wonderful. I'm going to take the screen back because all of this, Tony, did you have something?
Oh, yeah. You can say, I'll say it.
Okay, try again, Tony. Go ahead.
Yeah, you go on. I'll say it after you say it. I'll say that's what you're going to say. I'll say it after.
Oh, okay. You good? All right. So
I'll
this is.
after. Go ahead and say what you're just going to say. I'll say it after.
Okay. Well, I'm about to open up the slides and go through the story real quick. Do you want to get this said now?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll get it done now. Okay. So I was watching this sort of not really TED talk, but it was a lecture by a Muslim gentleman who talked about, I forget what it was, but he did mention one part where he mentioned one of, if not the most difficult times for Muslims, especially the Ummah, and he said this: if you gather all the suffering of the Muslims today, it does not compare to even a fraction of what the Muslim Ummah went under the Mongols. Mm-hmm. And then he got to one point about the Siege of Baghdad, which is probably one of the most brutal sieges in Islamic history, because see, here's the thing. Hulagu's men killed his sisters and children in front of the Caliph's with his own eyes, and then he brought the Caliph inside. The Caliph, he's petrified. He's just sitting there, and Hulagu tells him, "You know what? I'm going to keep you alive for a while." And then he wanted to keep him alive to disarm the citizens and soldiers. Mm-hmm. And then at some point, Hulagu said this, that the blood of the Muslims was halal for the next 40 days. 40 days. And they unrelentingly, there were some narrations that say a Mongol woman would enter a home and not even the men would fight her back. She would just go to her yard and bring her sword, and she would just slay all of them. Some of the Muslims even had to eat corpses in order to survive. Mm-hmm. And remember what I said about Burkay Khan of the Golden Horde, who was the first Islamic ruler in a Mongol Khanate? Mm-hmm. When he heard about that, let's just say he wasn't too pleased.
Well, no, because what you've got, and you just set me up for the topic, because what we're going to talk about tonight is where there is this tension between this love that is propelling Jesus and what Jesus is walking into. And so this is where the crux of the passion sort of comes into play, right? And so I'm going to go back into the share again, folks, and I'm going to. It's really my pleasure to welcome. Stop. Let's move on. There you go. What's going on with Jesus that's really important is that, and I'm just going to teach tonight, because if I open up and I try to see everybody, it freezes up my screen. Jesus keeps telling the disciples before this big moment that we read about at the top that something is amiss. Some trouble's coming. Something's about to happen. those of you that are fans of Jesus Christ Superstar know that this is kind of what's going on in the early parts of that musical, right? Jesus saying, you know, there's going to be trouble, there's going to be trouble, there's going to be trouble. And 3 different times in Mark's book, where, as Mary pointed out in the chat, Mark is very much a cut to the chase kind of guy. He's like, boom, let's go. And that's because he's showing there's this urgency that Jesus has, this tremendous urgency to make sure that he gets this work done. He is definitely on a mission here. And he's on a mission to confront and to deal with power. Now it starts, and so he says, first of all, in Mark 8:31, after Peter, he says to Peter, who do people say I am? And he says, well, some say you're Elijah, some say you're this, some say you're that. Well, who do you say I am? And Peter says, you're the Christ. And after Peter says that, Jesus doesn't go, oh, give that man a gold star. He's figured it all out. None of that. Jesus says, well, let's not talk about me being the Christ. Let's talk about me being who I am and what's going on right now. Right now, the human one, which is always the way that Jesus would refer to himself whenever he was dealing with his sort of the political side of his mission, the human one must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and legal experts, be killed, and then after 3 days, rise from the dead. And they all go like, what? Peter, who just had this big breakthrough about that Jesus is the Christ? Right? Says, that can't be true. And Jesus says, didn't you just say I was the Christ? And now you're going to tell me what I'm saying isn't true? What's wrong with you? All right. And so then we go along and they're walking along, they're moving toward Jerusalem, and they meet a man who says, my son is vexed by evil spirits. He throws himself in the fire. He screams, he rages. You got to do something for him. And so Jesus delivers this man, his son, from the torment that he's suffering. And then they move on, and then Mark just says, and all this happened because he was teaching his disciples, the human one will be delivered into human hands. They will kill him. 3 days after he is killed, he will rise up. Now I want us to pay attention to what Mark is doing, because Mark is a really clever structuralist. First of all, there's this, Jesus is the Christ. There's a messianic claim. But now there's an exorcism. Something's evil in the presence, in the body of the politic. Something evil is going on. We're going to need an exorcism here, y'all. This is and the child becomes symbolic of what the problem is in his entire culture, right? And then, so they keep going. And then the next chapter, there's a bunch of disciples following close to Jesus, and they're amazed. And then there's a bunch that are following in the distance, and they're afraid. And Jesus just stops and says, look, we're going up to Jerusalem. The human one, there it is again, will be handed over to the chief priests and the legal experts. The chief priests, the legal experts, okay? They will condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentiles. They will ridicule him, spit on him, torture him, and kill him. After 3 days, he will rise up. It's very interesting that Jesus keeps referring to himself in the third person, because he is sort of the object of the corruption that he is going to confront. This is something that this is going to happen to him, okay? And it's not me, it's him. But yet he stages this thing because he's also got his head in Zechariah and a prophecy that all the people that he's traveling with, all the folks who really know the study, they know, which is, rejoice greatly, daughter Zion, sing aloud, daughter Jerusalem. Look, your king will come to you. He is righteous and victorious. He is humble and riding on an ass, on a colt, the offspring of a donkey. This is something, an animal that's not even been trained yet. And here comes your king on a lowly animal, but not even an animal that's been broken yet. But then look what happens. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, which is another name for Israel, and the war horse from Jerusalem. He's going to end the war life, the contention that is in this place. The bow will be used in battle, will be cut off. He will speak peace to the nations. This is what's powerful about this, is he's going to Jerusalem. Jerusalem, by its very name, means the foundation of peace. And so Jesus is actually not going in to do anything new to Jerusalem. He's going in to remind Jerusalem about who it is and what its business is supposed to be. And so what really kind of happens, it's very interesting, is when we go into this story, you have to get a sense of how the whole society is structured. You got Caesar at the top, then you've got a Roman governor, Pilate, who's running Palestine, and underneath them there's this puppet king, Herod. He's allegedly the king of the Jews, but Herod converts to Judaism and marries into the royalty. He's not even really Jewish, all right? He comes from outside of the Jewish faith. And then underneath him, you've got the temple authorities, these chief priests, these scribes, these elders that we keep hearing about. These are people that are actually governing the people of Israel based on Roman imprimatur. The Romans are saying this is how you run it. And then beneath them, and they are part of a very moneyed merchant class. These are the people that own the land. You're not supposed to, according to Jewish law, own big land that you profit from while people go hungry, but they all do. They all have farms, and this is all going on. And Passover is the early parts of the spring harvest. So they have this sort of some skin in the game at this time. And then at the very bottom of this pile, there's the laborers, there's peasantry, and then there's slaves. This is the society. And Roman power trickles down. So that at the top, you've got all the power. By the time you get down, you've got next to nothing. So Jesus comes in and he's going to do something very interesting. He's going to flip the whole paradigm. He's going to put the power, he's going to put the power down at the bottom. The last shall become first, he says. It's right in this context that he says that. All right, so the last come first. That's where the power is going to reside. And the higher up you go, the less power you're going to have in his kingdom of God model. All right, so you've got an empire model and a kingdom of God model. And then you begin to put them side by side. Jesus versus Caesar. He's declared the Christ. Caesar claims to be divine. Jesus takes the name the Son of David. He is going to move into this tradition, right, of being the king of peace, the king who exalts Israel. Caesar's called the Son of God. That's part of his divinity. So there's some kind of blurring that's going on here. Jesus's peasant parade starts with Hosanna, save us, is what that means. When Caesar shows up, it's Ave, which is not about us at all. It's not about us needing anything. Ave, hail Caesar, means be well, Caesar. It's all aimed, the adoration is aimed up, right? Jesus comes in peace in the name of the Lord. Caesar occupies by force in his own name. Jesus empowers those without power or means, but Caesar will delegate authority and give it to religious and civil figures to execute his wishes, not to enable people to live their best lives. But I love this little crazy ceremony, this little satire parade that Jesus throws. This little, it's like he mocks all this Roman things, because exactly while Jesus is doing this, coming in one side of Jerusalem, on the other side, Pilate's showing up, because the Romans always show up during Passover, not because they want to be part of the celebration, but that's when something crazy could pop off. So we need to be in Jerusalem because that's where everybody comes into town. And so they use the pomp for propaganda. This big famous parade that's bringing Pilate into town to let all of Jerusalem know, y'all, Pilate's in the house, best behave yourself. That whole thing is to show how powerful Rome is. And Jesus is like, yeah, we can do this. It doesn't take a whole lot to roll out some carpet, just throw down some coats. You don't need a whole lot of banners, just get you some palms. You don't need some trumpets, just get some folks singing. We'll be all right. And that's what Jesus does. And what I love about it is he does it in such a small way that it doesn't lead to anything huge, as I've already pointed out. It's almost anticlimactic. Now let's go check out, see what's going on at the temple. All right, we got to look around. Okay, we can go home now. There's a wonderful kind of comedy that's at work in this. So the themes that Mark is setting up immediately when he takes us into the final work of Jesus's life is the contrast between domination and resistance. Domination and resistance. And those are the things we want to pay attention to. So I'm going to let Shay take it from here because he's got some cool stuff to say about this.
Yeah, thank you, Pastor Tim. So I want to highlight briefly something that Dr. Terrell said in our conversation, and that is that it is important to consider the particularity of Jesus. He came into a particular context as a person from a particular lineage. From his birth, his entire life was formed under the broad shadow of an impressive empire, which occupied Palestine, as Dr. Terrell said. So So the March on Jerusalem, right? These Jesus sort of performing something, also maybe doing some recon, right? The March on Jerusalem, as Pastor Tim has shown tonight, is in direct opposition to the Roman procession in the West. So Jesus enters from the East. Okay, so on one hand, we have a peasant procession, and on the other hand, we have an imperial, sort of military procession. And we're invited to think of this opposition as the central conflict of the entire week that leads to Jesus's crucifixion. So that's sort of the clash here, right? That Holy Week is a clash between powers and forces, principalities, right? So the power and theology of Jesus and the Jesus movement versus the power and theology of Rome. And Borg and Crossan do a really good job in their work of showing how Jerusalem, the city of God, became the center of a domination system. It was a place that in that time had concentrated wealth and power. And they even note that as the home of monarchy and aristocracy, of wealth and power, Jerusalem became the center of injustice and of betrayal of God's covenant. God's passion for justice had been replaced by human injustice. And so they kind of paint this portrait that we can see when we read Mark and the other Gospels, but they quote that this isn't a new problem, but Jesus is being birthed into an ongoing problem. Even the Hebrew prophets, some 8 centuries before Jesus arrives, spoke to Jerusalem becoming a place of injustice and inequity. And so this was a long time in the making. And so we have to see that Jesus's movement, as Pastor Tim showed, is the resistance from the bottom up of a top-down domination system. Okay, and a domination system is simply a way of organizing society, and in such a way that domination is the chief end. And so, Pastor Tim, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and hitting space bar, you can hit it 3 times because I'm just going to read through them, and then we'll. There we go. So Borg and Crossan talk about this domination system and the way it operated in society in 3 ways. So the first is political oppression. In other words, ordinary people had no voice in shaping society. Right? We read that that it was very much people in power were few and people with no power were many. Right? The second thing is economic exploitation. So high percentage of wealth went directly to the wealthy and powerful. And keep in mind too, all of the encounters in the Gospels of the crowd or Jesus with tax collectors. And think about the emotion that you can really sense in the text, the anger toward the tax collector who came in and would raise money for an oppressive, for another country to occupy what should be your homeland. And then the third thing is religious legitimation. And I'm sure none of these things sound familiar or have any sort of contemporary, examples. But the religious legitimation of it all. So religion was used to legitimate, to give a theology for a prosperity gospel, if you will, before there was a gospel. It really, in some ways, is the gospel as old as time. But religion was used to sort of keep things in place, to keep the powerful in power, to keep the wealthy wealthy. And so if we think about the Magnificat and the Song of Mary in Luke 1, it's really interesting. It really models, if you think that Pastor Tim and I are crazy and what we're saying, we're misguided, go back and read that Luke chapter 1, where she talks about bringing down the powerful from their thrones and sending the rich away empty. So with that, I'll just say that, so it's important to consider Jesus's what they call a triumphal entry into the city for the spectacle, yes, but also the indictment that it was of how the world was. And so it's no accident that Jesus enters and proceeds to the temple to then confront how temple theology had become complicit in the domination system. You're muted, Pastor Tim.
Shay,
Yes, sir. Go ahead,
Yes.
the
Chris.
thing that's missing there as well is, and it kind of fits into that religious legitimization, but actually the kind of political religious oppression, because when they were walking in on Palm Sunday, yes, that there was the direct opposition to Rome, but actually the people who were watching them were the religious guards and the religious priests, and that happened every single day. That they kind of went in every single day. The only kind of day that we focus on is this Palm Sunday spectacle. But where was the crowd on the Monday, the Tuesday, the Wednesday when they marched into the city? And also on the Thursday night, a mile outside of the city, it wasn't the Romans that went in and arrested. It was the temple guard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, so and our dialogue is often about Roman oppression, but actually it was the temple guards who came outside of the city walls in the night, in the dark, to take someone down who they could have taken down every day for the past 5 days, except that would have been in the middle of a city.
Exactly right. It's when they get Jesus isolated out in the garden on the outskirts, right? So they can sort of do this off camera, for lack of a better word, right? Because this is also
But it's the temple guard. I think it's important that it's the temple guards that do that, Tim.
Right. It's essential, because this is also what Jesus is opposed to. Look, the Romans are not really a big concern of Jesus's. They're not. They're just there. But where he is seeing the breakdown of his culture is in the fact that people who claim loyalty to the temple and the theology that was lifted and exalted in this temple of a God of love and a God of protection and a God of mercy, a God who also, and this is a big deal, why do you go back to the prophets? It's always remember the widow, take care of the orphan, welcome the stranger. And all of a sudden you've got these folks, this power elite that's in this temple, not practicing any of that. Not practicing any of it at all. They're in bed with power, all right? And they are also the temple, and these are the realities of what's going on when Jesus comes into Jerusalem. There's something else I want to point out is, now in John's gospel, Jesus flips in and out of Jerusalem all the time. But in the synoptic gospels, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus goes to Jerusalem once. He stays as far away from Jerusalem as he can with his people. He's up in the Galilee. He's actually over in pagan territory. He doesn't go down to Jerusalem. He's not interested in Jerusalem until he decides now it's time for us to go and let's talk about what's wrong, because the oppression that this entire nation is suffering is emanating not out of Rome, it's emanating out of Jerusalem. And this temple elite with their guard, you're exactly right. They have their own armed forces, they have their own courts, they've got their own everything. And they are not using any of that to alleviate the burden of the people. So you have, and they also are the executors of this trifold tax system. They collect tithes, which is a 10% of whatever you grow. That's an agricultural thing. But there's also a temple tax that every male Jew, not just in Israel, but even those that are abroad in the diaspora. And remember that only about 20% of the Jews in the world at this time lived in Israel. Another 80% were flung across the entire empire. They all had to pay the temple tax. There's the famous scene where Peter comes to Jesus in a fluster. We don't have the money to pay the temple tax. Temple taxes due. Got to pay the taxes. And Jesus says, just go over and pull a fish out. There's some money in there, and the coin is in the fish's mouth. It's a wonderful story. And then there, on top of that, the temple eventually becomes in Jerusalem the place where the Roman taxes get collected. The tax collectors work out of the temple. You also have this idea that now you've got all this corrupt power happening, and it's happening in a religious environment. It's happening in the name of God. You have a culture that keeps telling the people they have to sacrifice more. You have to sacrifice more. You need more sacrifice. And in the middle of it all, that sets up for merchandising abuses and money changing, because Jews didn't carry Roman coin. Does anybody know why they didn't carry Roman coin? We've probably talked about this. Because Caesar's face was on it. And the law says no graven images. So they're carrying shekels, But if they're going to buy, now all of a sudden they got to change your money if you're going to buy something, because the temple is operating on the Roman economy. There is this idealistic narrative tradition that this is King David's house, and that's used the same way. You know what? It's the equivalent of Make America Great Again. This is the wonder. This is the wonder of Jerusalem. This is the wonder of this. And there's this long history of exclusion. We all know that only certain folks could come into the temple. So you've got all of this stuff going on. This temple is a site where they're trying to balance empire and nationalism, and they're doing it in a religious context. And Jesus isn't having it. That's the big story. So I'm going to back off now, because that's the drama. This whole first episode on Sunday is like putting the boat in the water. It's like the first act of a play where it's like, what's wrong here? Some stuff's wrong here. Do we see parallels?
Yeah, actually, one, Tim. I'm not sure how much this has to do with this topic, but you're mentioning like the temple guard not behaving like their holy text and holy creator commanded them to. Just the same thing with the Crusades.
That's a good point, right?
They're one of the 10 commandments. If let's not remember, one of the 10 commandments was "Thou shalt not kill." And what did the Christian knights do when they straight up invaded a city populated by Muslims on their own accord?
The Crusades, are you exactly right, Tony? In fact, the whole Columbus project is funded by a desire to go back and take Jerusalem for Christ. Columbus came to the Western world, it's in his diaries, trying to take all the gold he can to go back to fund another crusade. But now, what about in our own time? How many different ways have we seen religion become sort of what's the word I want? An umbrella, a mask, whatever, for behaviors that are oppressive, that are exploitative, that a way to try to legitimize. Somebody talk to me. Anything going on lately that would make you think about this? What happened on January 6th? Have you seen the video where they go into the house, and the first thing they do is they say a prayer? It's the most astonishing thing. They say a prayer. The Proud Boys go in and they have they say a prayer, and they thank God for this ability to stand up for what's right and to take the nation back for Christ.
Tim, I often feel like they've hijacked Christ in the United States. We are losing so many young people in the church. And I think a big reason is because they see this kind of hypocrisy, and they see this perversion of gospel, this prosperity gospel. It's so ugly. And it convinces even poor people of no means that they are only righteous if they give everything they have so some man can have his own private jet. It's just awful. And they've taken it, and we have to reclaim it.
Yeah.
This has been here for 400 years, the way they justified owning slaves and all that. It's been there all along. It's not new.
It's not new. There's always been, because white supremacy has always been cloaked in a Christian kind of language, right? What did the Ku Klux Klan burn on your lawn? They didn't burn a fist. They burned a cross on your lawn to show this. There is this idea that what's going, and so when and the reason why I'm wanting to pull this out is not just because I know that we're all really bruised after the last run of things, but I don't want to bang on that to use one of Dr. Terrell's phrases. I don't want to open the wound that heals, but at the same time, I want us to think about the fact that what Jesus is walking into is not very different at all than what so many of us have been twisted up about lately, okay, or for a long time. That a lot of the cultural challenges that Jesus is going in not to address Let's be very, very clear. Jesus has been talking to these people for 3 years. And if you go back and you look at the conversations, he's trying to show them, okay, you're all wrapped up about this, but what about this? You're all, there's the great story of the widow in the church, right? She's only got a little bit, and you've got the Pharisees. Oh, I'm a big campaign contributor. I've given all thousands of dollars, and here comes, she drops a penny in, and Jesus said, she's given more than all of you. Jesus keeps pushing them back to principles. What are the principles at work? We've lost. I didn't come to get rid of the law. I came to fulfill it. Why are we not living into this law that we've been given, this divine way of understanding grace and humility and all of that? Instead, and so he's been talking to them. He's done talking. If you go into reading the Passion, you need to understand Jesus is done talking. He's not going, there's no more reasoning with anybody. I'm going in, this is wrong, and what's happening. So now this question becomes, Jesus is now, we're coming back to agency, right? Jesus has made the decision. I've got to go into Jerusalem, and I already know that what I'm doing is going to get me killed, but I'm going anyway. What does that do for us? And I'm going to get really personal here in terms of our own understanding of grace and where we are in this season of Lent, in this time of contemplating what sacrifice means, all of that. What kind of, somebody give me a feeling of kind of what other kind of ideas are triggered in terms of just our own spiritual practice and our own way that we can relate to this story and understand what's being sort of asked of us as followers of this Jesus, whether we're close and amazed or far and afraid. What's going on here?
It's in a way, there's a lot of parallels between Jesus and Dr. King.
There are a lot of, because he did the same thing, right?
And remember what I said? Like, we often think of his speeches like, I have as one of the most famous speeches of his, and no doubt that it is, but people don't really seem to understand it. People don't really seem to understand how sort of prophetic it is, like how he was sort of like prophesying his own death to his followers. Like he says, I've seen the mountaintop. I may not get there with you, but I've seen paradise. I may not get there with you, but I've seen it.
Mm-hmm. Which is sort of and King was very much steeped in Black liberation theology comes after him, but he's steeped in the teachings of Howard Thurman, who is a precursor to Black theology, who is very much about justice and about understanding, and this idea that God sides with the oppressed was not new to Black liberation theology. It had been a lot, and a lot of, if you watch the documentary that Henry Louis Gates did this week, there was a lot of information about where back even in the 19th century, people in the Black church were looking up and saying, God has to look like us. If I'm made to look like God, then God has to look like us. What does that mean? And what Jesus is really trying to do is show us God, but show us God in the particularity of suffering with the oppressed, standing up against those who are marginalized and maligned and exploited. And I know this is good old liberal Christian theology. This is the stuff that preaches every Sunday. But at the same time, I wanted us to start here because it's going to get, next week, we're going to talk about sacrifice in some very real ways because Jesus goes after the sacrifice people. That's what happens next. And what does that mean? And where does that come from? But in the same time, I want us to begin in this time of this study and with Dr. Terrell's help, because, she's going to keep us humming. I can promise you that. You already got a sense of that. Is thinking about what this means for us. And when we read these stories, like I said last week in the Joni Mitchell quote, right? If you think my songs are about me, if you're not seeing yourself in my songs, that it's not important. These stories are not told to us just so we know what happened. These stories are told to us with the expectation that we try to find ourselves in them and be aware of the world and see the world we live in them, and see, because there's a human weakness prevails in these stories. Human weakness prevails. There are always, I think everybody at a certain point says, I'm willing to go that far, but not any further. This is as far as I can go. This is as far. Okay, I'm going to need you to give up your house so that homeless people can live there and you go live in the tent for a while. Yeah, that might be one bridge too far for me. That's the question that we have. And I'm not saying, well, everybody get out of your houses. What I'm saying is that we need to understand the particularity of Jesus, of the disciples, of this conversation, of his oppressors. Why are these chief priests in bed with Rome? What do they love about their lives so much that they're not willing to give that up? What do they love about being in power that they're not willing to give up or surrender? Why are the merchants breaking the law, knowing they're breaking the law? Is it just the money? I want us in this study series to try to get some texture and some complexity around these ideas, to give this a little more dimension, because it's going to find us in some unusual ways along the way.
It's been about power ever since forever.
You're exactly, yeah. It's always about power. It's always about power, but the lust for power makes us do crazy things. Also, the way we're conditioned to respond to power makes us do crazy things. I think that if you've ever had a situation where I've some friends who do a podcast. They are part of the New Thought movement, and they're really lovely people. And one of them is one of my closest friends ever. And so a lot of times when I'm running, I'll listen to their podcast. And one of the things that they are always kind of trying to advocate is a disengagement by never being anti anything. All right, never opposing anything, but just being pro everything that's good. I'm just for love. And it's like, all right, well, what do you say to the folks that aren't loving? How do you respond to them? Well, I don't have to respond to them because that gives them, that validates what they're saying. If I ignore them, I won't be validating. And it's like, child, they don't care about you. They're not gonna say, oh, I better start loving because, people aren't listening to me. That's not how that works. And that's kind of what Dr. Terrell was trying to get us to understand about this love that is compelling Jesus, driving him right into Jerusalem. Driving him right is this idea that there's something that's got to be addressed, and it's not going to happen with me just going in and singing Kumbaya, all right, and light a candle. Let's not doing a vigil. That's not going to change the world. Something dramatic has to happen. And so how do we take those principles and bring them back home in our own lives? We will be for, and then probably for as long as any of us, with the exception of Tony. I pray it's better by the time Tony gets to be our age. But for most of us, we will be in the struggle of race in America until we die. Okay, that's the way that's going to work. And because we're not going to get it fixed that fast. We've been working on it for a long time. We're getting better. We've seen quantum leaps of progress. We're just not going to get it fixed. And so in the middle of it all, there's a lot. I was at the vigil. Some of you were there too, at the vigil for Live Cafe, where the church started, when they had the racist attack. And there was the vigil. Mary, I think you were there. And were you there on the big street? I don't know, at the cafe that night for the vigil? I think Joycelyn was there as well.
I wasn't there.
Okay, and one of the speakers just got up and said, y'all, we're not going to win this battle by you all standing here with your candles lit. That's not going to win the battle. You got to win the battle whenever you have racist friends that are thinking that it's okay around you to spread their hate and talk hatefully, and you think that you've got to be nice to them. That's where the brakes get put on. We're not going to end homophobia by me trying to come up and say, you know what, I know that you don't agree with my quote unquote lifestyle, and so therefore, I'm just going to pretend like this doesn't exist. That's not going to get rid of homophobia. All right. It's going to have to be the way you feel about me is hateful and it's beneath you, and I cannot be part of this. If you don't like it, then I gotta go. It's okay. You're not hurting me. It doesn't hurt me that I can't be with you because you're not loving me. And so what Jesus is showing us, what I love is this fight happens this fight begins with this very hugely scaled down parade, this sort of do-it-yourself parade, kind of like we might do in our backyards. You know, I don't know if you were a kid and you grew up and you did a circus in your backyard, or you did some kind of thing in your backyard, and well, just give me a broom and give me a broom and give me a bucket and I'll be a king. That's what Jesus is doing. And why is he doing that? To show that our push for righteousness, our intention to stand up for what's right, is scalable. It doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be a march on Washington with 1 million people. It doesn't have to be that. It could be just as simple as give me your coat. Go get me something. Go get me some old little coat that they might not even miss it. If somebody ask you about it, just say, they might not even, just go get that. We're going to do something here. And it's going to be small. But to Chris's point, in the other Gospels, not in Mark, but in the other Gospels, the religious folks are standing there watching. And they're like to Jesus, you better get your folks under control. You better do something about these folks. They see what's going on. And Jesus is like, well, if I make them be quiet, the very rocks are going to cry out. This cannot be contained. Injustice cannot be tolerated. There will be a voice for it. But it doesn't always have to be. I'm grateful for Dr. King being able to assemble 1 million people on the steps of the Lincoln. That was an amazing moment. But y'all, that's not what anti-racism is. I'm glad that there was 1 million of us marching through the streets of Washington for marital equality. But that's not what anti-homophobia is. Go ahead.
I heard someone, I don't have the attribution, but I heard someone say something a couple of years ago, and it really shook me. She said, to someone who is accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. And I feel like we are a very trauma-filled society, and that a lot of people, white people, who are enjoying the status quo, they are so plagued with trauma that they are not able to actually see other people and recognize other people's reality. And I was raised in an interracial family. I was raised by a Black man. My mother's white. My sisters are biracial. And many times, at least 20 times in my adult life, I've had to turn around when I'm in a room with other white people and they're talking crap about somebody of color and say, I'm not in your white club.
Yeah.
I'm not. And that's inappropriate. And you need to check yourself. Because you're right. It starts with our individual actions day by day.
Jesus is going in small, but he's coming out big. That's the story here. He's going in small. He's not even going to make a scene. He's sort of done this wonderful little piece of theater outside of town. He's not even going to go in and shake things up until next week. Next week, it's going to get fierce, y'all. So next week is where the revolution really takes root. Spend some time in Mark 11 through 13. It's a lot of text. We're going to take some gems out of it, but we're going to suddenly see how this really, really works. I love how we want to, Chris made a note in the chat that's so good. He's like, we've been misreading the gospel our whole lives because we're conditioned from Sunday school. It's violent. It's not for chickens. This gospel is for people that are ready to stand up and say like, all right, I'm ready to go do something. Something got to happen here. That's the way that works. And that's what we see happening. Jesus had 3 years with these disciples, and even up to the day of, some are behind, traveling far away. They're afraid. They're afraid. Some are amazed, some are afraid. But Jesus is going to show them kind of how to work this and how to move through this. What's going to be very interesting, and we're going to see as we read through these texts, is that Mark keeps coming after the disciples and pointing out how they fail, because they keep failing. They keep getting afraid. And that goes back to the way that we often are. I really like this idea. I really like signing on. I'll sign on to this. Oh, but wait a minute. That sounds a little, Jeff, to our conversation earlier tonight, that sounds a little dangerous. Never mind. Okay.
I was just, am I muted? No,
No.
I was just thinking how many times Edison failed,
Yeah.
and what did he have to say about failure? You go towards failure. It's okay. You get
just
no
keep going.
success without failure.
That's right.
You
That's
admit
right.
you're not perfect. You're not, we're not Jesus. But we
But look at
strive to
Jesus
be like Jesus, right? So
with
we head in that direction. But
that's right. So here's the other piece. Jesus staged this big parade.
Yeah.
He didn't unseat Roman power. He didn't, in the end, you know, my Hebrew Bible teacher in seminary was wonderful, Rabbi Mary told me, she said, we're going to read the prophets, and I just want to tell you right up the front, they didn't change anything. That's not the point. The point is that we have responsibility as free moral agents in this kingdom of God to stand up for what's right, whether or not the society bends to our will. What the moral arc of the moral arc of the universe is long. It will bend, but it takes a long time. So it's not, if we're looking for the, if we're looking to be on the front page as being, you know, that's never going to happen, y'all. But Jesus didn't make the front pages in his day either. He was hanging with thieves. He was nobody special. It's not until the impact of his action took root that all of a sudden his story began to get told. I was listening to the documentary this week one more time, and I will stop referring to it. But in the documentary this week, so many of those people whose names were called, there were only 2 or 3 pictures of them even, because they did not even draw enough attention in the world to get the newsreel photographers interested in them. Think of Fannie Lou Hamer, you know. I think of Prathia Hall, who gave Dr. King the I Have a Dream idea. All right? We don't talk about them. I'll be one of those. I'm a soldier in the army of the Lord, right? I'll just do that. I'll just do that.
It's kind of, I was at a conference or online at a conference in Wisconsin earlier on this week, talking about and it was talking, the whole theme was the kind of historical trauma of stigma for both Indigenous people in North America and Black Americans in North America. But one of the things that the speaker from Milwaukee was talking about was, you know, when he went to school as a Black American, he learned about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and such, but he didn't learn about anyone else that was involved in those Montgomery marches, or the other 3 girls who were going to school, or the other people who were getting, you know, the folks who were getting arrested every night in Montgomery and spending evenings in police stations in Montgomery and Birmingham and such. That he was kind of going, you know, this story was about 5 people at most. Yeah. And actually it wasn't. It was about all of us, and we need to get back into that historical truth.
You got to go back to that. I mean, one of the greatest stories, and there was a picture last night of Dr. King, and there stood next to him was Bayard Rustin, who helped engineer the whole March on Washington in '63, that whole piece. He was the one that was sort of he was a Quaker, but he was a gay man. And so Bayard kept getting shoved out of the story. The women kept sort of getting shoved out of the story, except for Mahalia Jackson, who was already a diva when she showed up, kept getting shoved out of the story. And so the problem that the thing that I want to put to us is that we probably will get shoved out of the story when it's all said and done. That's just going to happen. But that story will not happen without all those folks that get shoved out. That's why it's important for us to go back and remember them, not just to give them their rightful due, but to remind ourselves that the greatest and the heaviest and the most powerful work is done by people who are very seldom lionized, you know, whose names don't get called, who don't make it. Because see, what happens is history gets written by folks and gets laundered. We love Dr. King. Nobody want to talk about Malcolm X, right? We love Dr. King. But if you talk to anybody, it's like there would be no king without X. Those two, they are two peas in the same pod, right?
Even in Chicago, I remember a couple of years back listening to Mavis Staples talking about how every night they would end up in arrested and in a jail cell, and then would come out the next day with Pop Staples and Mavis Staples and the rest of the family, and then be up singing as King came up onto the stage. And you kind of think that's a whole lot of sacrifice.
Yeah. And it's the willful sacrifice. It's not demanded. It's the willful sacrifice. It's powerful. It's powerful.
Tim.
Yes, sir.
Now that you think about it, I remember in ninth grade, I was reading a poem. Was supposed to read a poem. We was taught a line from a film, which was about Muhammad Ali. And he was forced to, and he was, I'm not sure he was drafted, but he was asked to fight in other land and on foreign soil. And he refused. And we all know what happened. He was imprisoned. And we watched the scene, but there's this one verse I'll never forget. He says, "You're my enemy." Not no Chinese, no Viet Cong, no Japanese. Think about that for a minute. He was saying the Japanese weren't his enemy, the Chinese weren't his enemy, the Viet Cong weren't his enemy. We were his enemy.
Yeah.
Think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
And we all know Muhammad Ali was a pretty tough dude.
Yes.
Back in his youth. We all know how popular he was. We know how much of a wrestler he was. And he was being, he was saying we were his enemy. Not anyone, not any of these foreigners that he was being asked to fight.
I will tell you this, one of the things that's troubling for me as the son of Southerners who claims and is proud of his Southern roots, and if you get me tired enough, my accent gets thicker and thicker and thicker, but that's the way that works. And I sure will throw down with some cornbread and beans. I love that stuff. But at the same time, when I'm talking to my family who lived in Alabama at the height of it, they have no memory of it. They just don't remember it. That's what they claim. And that is the problem when whenever your people write the history, you have the right to erase entire episodes from your own life. What Jesus is doing here, and what we need to be mindful of as we go forward into this week, into this Lenten season, is Jesus is showing us that we have the power to change history by doing what's right in the moment wherever we are. That's how you do it. You don't wait for the grand moment to arrive. You do it every day where you are. And I love the fact that the last week of Jesus's life is where all the Gospels spend more time on this 1 week than they spend on 30 years. They get all wrapped up in this week because it's a day by day by day thing. Every day. And I think there's power there. Oh, you all, I could do, one day I'm going to do this all night and I'll just be sitting here by myself. I understand that. But I want to let you all go. I want to thank you all as always. I hope this has been rich, and I hope that you all have enjoyed it. Take some time this week to read the text. Watch your email tomorrow for worship opportunities. That's going to be a critical piece of everything. So make sure we do that. This is Black History Month. I really would love to see as close to 100% participation as possible from all of us. We are, that's our community. So I will send that out. Hey, Hazel, how are you? Good to see you, love.
We're gonna close in a second, so you can say bye-bye to everyone and stay for a final prayer. Okay.
So I want to thank you all, and we're going to do that right now. Chris knew exactly what the playbook was. You all did. We're going to
in the morning, isn't it? You should be in bed.
I was in bed.
She was in bed. Let's just take a moment to take a breath and just breathe together and think about tomorrow When we walk into our own Jerusalems, wherever that may be, what are we doing? What is the claim that's being made on us out of love? How are we going to give sacrificial love, which might be dangerous, but in some way or another has to come out of us. It can't be demanded or exacted of us. It's not a sacrifice on demand. It's a sacrifice as a gift. And not just in big political issues, but just in clear little ethical moments. How are we going to walk in to our Jerusalems tomorrow? God, we thank you for your word, and we thank you for the fact that we find ourselves in your story, and that you become part of our story, and that the lines get blurred. And it's not just a simple, what would Jesus do? It's more like, this is who we are. This is our particularity. It comes from following you, sometimes very close in amazement, sometimes from the distance in terror. But we're following you. So now I pray that as we go forward into this week, into this Lenten season of contemplation and self-reflection and all the things that go, figuring out what we got to give up and what we got to take on and what we need to be and what we're not, and all of the things that wound into the Lent experience. God, I pray that you will just keep reminding us that every day is just another step into Jerusalem, another step, that the minute we go into this desert is the minute we are coming out of it and going into the places where you would have us be to do the work that you would want us to do. God, I thank you for everyone that's here. I thank you for those that would like to be here but can't because of schedule conflicts and work and all sorts of things. And I pray, most righteous God, that you will continue to strengthen us, make us what you would have us be. Because in the end, that's the only way that you will be glorified, and we want to give your name the praise and the glory for all that you do through us, in us, and with us. We ask this in your name. Amen. Good night, everybody. Say good night, Hazel.